Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Clyde Sherrodi, and welcome to African Knowledge Show. Tonight edition, we're talking with Oliver Maboreke, who is in Sydney, an African Australian from a Zimbabwean background, who is established now in Sydney, and who is going to talk to us about his role in the community, and we'll be specifically discussing isolation, the impact of isolation that is actually coming, that is being aggravated as a result of the lockdown in this COVID crisis situation. We know that isolation, even outside of COVID, is one thing that actually has been linked to a lot of issues, including mental health issues. When people are isolated, not only they are prey to a lot of things that do not help them individually, they're also more likely to become sick. So it's important that for us, we talk about some of the effect of these things, especially the fact that whether it's in Melbourne or in Sydney, the lockdown is being extended and extended, and that has devastating effect on the minds of people. We can see even in mainstream media, ABC namely run an episode of 7:30 where they were talking about how families are being affected, including children who are unable to go to school, and their socialization is somehow compromised in addition to their schooling. So this is a very important topic. Let me bring my guest in tonight. Oliver Maboreke, how are you, my friend?
Yeah, I'm good, Clyde. How are you doing? Good to see you again.
Good to see you. How are you in Sydney? I know you're in lockdown, but I still have to ask you, how are you?
Well, we're trying to cope, man. We just trying to cope. Look, and probably this is the longest I've kept my hair in many years. So that's some of the effect that's having on me as well.
Yeah, so it's been quite a while. How many weeks has it been in Sydney now with the lockdown?
I think we're going on to probably 11, 12 weeks now.
Well, that's quite a bit. You guys are, learning to become Victorians, because we've had our, how many weeks? 16 or more, lockdown, and we couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't do anything. Obviously, the situation in Sydney is quite critical. The numbers that are coming out of Sydney are pretty terrifying. Hopefully, things will start going down, but if they don't improve, I suppose that is also playing on the minds of people. These high numbers of positive tests, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think the high numbers. I think most people now have even given up of even looking at the updates, because it's just it seems like the numbers keep going up and up, and it's a bit of a traumatizing effect on people. So you see, it's a very dire situation, and this Delta variant of the COVID-19, it's really wreaking havoc on the community.
Okay, now you are a very active member of the community. I remember even before, because you lived in Victoria before, and then you moved to Sydney. How long ago has that been? How long have you been in New South Wales for?
Not too long. Sometimes I still call Victoria home, because pretty much most of my networks are still up there. But look, New South Wales now home for me. So I moved down here in 2013. So it's been quite a while. Yeah, it's been quite a while.
It's been a little while. In about 2 years, it'll be 10 years. So that's a little while. Even though in Victoria, you lived for how many years? More than 10 years, I think.
In Victoria, I lived for probably close to like 12 years as well.
12 years, absolutely. All right. So you've been an active member of the African Australian community, both in Victoria and in Sydney. Before we go into this isolation and the impact of COVID and all that sort of thing, tell us, how do you see community life, the health of the African Australian community from Victoria to New South Wales?
Look, it's New South Wales. It's a different landscape. Look, I think probably comparatively, I found Victoria to be more like open. The communities are much more outgoing. The communities are much more active in doing a lot more stuff. And I remember, there's so much happening: music festivals, soccer tournaments, and stuff like that. And but New South Wales, I would take New South Wales. It's a bit conservative on the conservative side. So I've kind of like even scaled down in terms of my networking, in terms of the African community, and even as you know me previously, I used to be very active in coaching soccer, community soccer. But when I moved here, it's been a bit of a lull. So I've sort of like in terms of community activeness, I would sort of put Victoria as up there in terms of Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we're winning, man, Victoria. You know between Victoria and New South Wales, it's always been there's always ongoing competition, and it's good to hear that we're still doing okay. But let's and actually before even we go into the COVID again, tell us a little bit about yourself. You came to Australia a long time ago, and you've built a career, you got a family. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, your background, and how you've been faring in your Australian journey.
No, it's a long journey. Look, one of my friends was telling me that I could write a book, probably 20 series book about my journey. Look, I'm originally from Zimbabwe, as you know. I was born in a small village, typical in a small village in Honde Valley, eastern part of Zimbabwe. I love that place, one of the most scenic views in Zimbabwe. And I basically grew up there, and I eventually ended up like most young people and their families end up in the urban areas of Harare. So I did most of my schooling in Harare, and I went to a very prestigious boys' high school in Harare, which was very famous for molding young men into men. So it was called Churchill High School. So I still got memories of that school. So look, and I started off my career as a teacher. Actually, I trained as a teacher, but then eventually moved into community development and community capacity building. So I worked with communities around HIV, gender mainstreaming. So worked, and also I was heavily involved in sports as well. I was a soccer coach, so I used to coach. I remember when I was even in schools, I used to coach soccer in schools, and I played a bit of soccer myself as well. And look, and then just like anybody else around about that time in Zimbabwe, the things were not really going well, so I sought to come out to to a country where I could find a new life. So actually what happened was that I was very active in politics in Zimbabwe, student politics and opposition politics. So one of my during one of my activities, we were really, there were some issues that happened. So in the end, I was justly organized a scholarship to come to. I had to choose between four countries. I had to go to Sweden, Norway, maybe UK, and Russia, and then Australia. So I chose Australia because Australia is a sporting country, and I used to watch the Skippy with the Bush Kangaroo series, TV series. So that actually drawn me here to here. So I came out here to study. So I came out to study, and I studied at RMIT. I studied international project planning and development. So, and I eventually ended up, I worked for the Department of Premier and Cabinet just shortly, and worked for several organizations in Victoria, in the community development sector, and in the around settling of refugee migrant and maybe their adaptability into the community and stuff like that. So I did a lot of projects around that area. So, and then so, and I also worked in child protection as well up in Victoria for a bit, and then eventually I ended up coming here, and so here I worked in the NGO sector with an organization that worked with asylum seekers, and I also had a secondment and I actually worked at the 2 detention centers in Nehru and PNG, and eventually I moved on, then started working at the university. I worked at one of the leading universities here in New South Wales, Western Sydney University, as a community engagement project officer, working with new and emerging communities around working around education accessibility and scholarship and stuff like that. And eventually I left, and I'm now working in government in the Department of Communities and Justice.
Good, so that's good. Me. Well, that's quite a long journey, obviously, and you are still going. I know you're a runner. You keep running. That's good. Okay. Yeah. Now, you one of your roles right now, you as a community multicultural ambassador. Tell us a little bit about what that involves.
Yes, I was nominated and inducted as a the Sydney community Western Sydney Community Forum ZEST ambassador, which is like a multicultural ambassador role. Basically, my role is to promote multicultural communities, their issues in the community, and then promoting the Western Sydney Community Forum, which is an organization of which promotes community organization around Western Sydney mostly, but then now it is actually diverted to working across Western Sydney and Australia and New South Wales as a whole. So I'm just basically mine is basically an ambassadorial role, and also advocating for communities and their aspirations in the community, and also the various form, whether they may be in religious groups, community groups, young people, youth, and so forth. And at the moment, I'm currently involved in a community music program with a few young people, and so that is just basically to promote, culture and belonging, and also where we have come from as a people. Like particularly, like for me, I came from Africa, so just promoting language and music and culture from an African perspectives, because Australia is a multicultural country, so we need to be looking at promoting our cultures in Australia.
Absolutely, promoting our culture in Australia is important, and I guess we do quite a bit of that. But there's room for more. Let's talk about the whole COVID thing now. You've seen obviously how some of these lockdown impact have affected many people in the community. People are being isolated. From an African culture, we're sort of community minded, and all of a sudden we are cut off from anything that represent that, including those of us, for example, who go to church, who enjoy that company of people with the same faith, or other people go in their own places of worship. We can't get together with friends. We can't do anything together. We're sort of locked in our houses. How does that affect people's minds?
Look, as I said, COVID has created a new dimension altogether. So what it has done is it has devastated communities, particularly communities that come from from multicultural background, particularly African and any other related communities, because generally our communities are built on multiplicity. Like we've got this saying in Africa, which is "I am because we are." So an individual cannot exist without the group. So what COVID has done is basically isolate individuals and communities from their own. So like you're saying, look, for example, like, I go to church, but for a number of weeks now, months on end, I've not been able to go to church as much as I go to church for the spiritual aspects. But then it's also a place where I get to to meet people from my own cultural background, people from the community, and socialize. That builds an individual, that builds a community, that builds a family. But that has really been sort of cut off. So we see now families, we're under this very strict lockdown, whereby it's only you, your family, and your kids that are only allowed in your own home. So basically, you find that there's a lot of stress that's involved. There's a lot of even mental health issues as well, because look, we are people that likes to be with other people. So when you are cut off from those networks, it becomes a bit of a stress, and you find that people are just like just today I was just talking to my wife, and she was just sharing that look, she's actually a nurse. She goes to work, she comes home, there's nothing else, there's nothing, no hanging out with friends, nothing else to do, and it's a big stress, and and it has impacted not just maybe the adult population, but I think even young people as well, like the youth. The youth cannot do anything. They cannot go out to see their friends. So, increasingly, like quite recently, I was reading a story whereby, there was actually a couple of other young people that have actually committed suicide because of the loneliness that has been created. So it's really a big big dynamic that has been created. So, and then it's just there's nobody who knows how to deal with it. How can you? It's finding those solutions. It's very hard to find solutions to deal with this kind of isolation.
And then when you are isolated at home, you turn the TV on, all you can see is COVID related.
Yes.
Reports about how many tests, how many people are dying,
how many people have died, how many people have got COVID.
It is this is unprecedented, isn't it? It's really,
it is.
And what would you suggest that people do to try to I suppose, minimize this level of stress that comes from that isolation, forced isolation in relation to COVID? What would be some of the your insight
I,
in relation to that?
I guess, look, as I said, it's been very hard. So, as I said, we are communities that are used to be with other people. You're walking down the street, going to visit an uncle, going to visit, friends, relatives. Like me, I'm basically a musician as well. Hanging out with people from my band, going to church, going for band practice and stuff like that. So that has been cut off. So I think support, and I think what just need to do, because of this is not gonna end anytime soon. It's basically reinvent the way we relate to each other. So, and maybe try to make things work even within communities. Try to because I think what's now happening is now sometimes families that were not so close are forced to be together.
Mm.
Sometimes some of the dynamics between the older generation and the young generation. So you find that we now need to find new ways of actually interacting. So many times I found that many organizations are now going to platforms like Zoom to have interaction programs, community programs on Zoom. Also having maybe even they're having even sometimes people are now having even Zoom parties. And some people are even having, like, even now we find that churches and religious organizations are having Zoom activity. So I think it goes in its own way to actually try to maintain this interaction. But also, I think it's just up to us as individuals. We pick up that phone maybe every day and call a friend, call a neighbor, and just check on them and just say, just have those conversations, because that can go in a long way to actually make sure that somebody does not become so lonely that they go into depression.
Yeah, and I suppose the online technologies do offer us opportunities to interact with people who are far away from us, but it's never the same when you have an in-person interaction with somebody, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I'll tell you one thing. Look, like for me, it was actually a tradition for me to make sure that every 2 years I travel back home to Zimbabwe. Look, I'm Australian, but then look, my roots are in Zimbabwe, so I've got big family back in Zimbabwe. But because of COVID, many people are not able to travel, to see their family. Because for me, sometimes when I do travel back home and go to Zimbabwe with my family, it's almost like a detox, almost like you unwind, you recharge. But then that opportunity has been lost completely. So it's very hard. And I remember, look, I had a few cousins, a few nieces that are having weddings, and usually under normal circumstances, I would travel back home to go to travel and be part of those weddings. And several times, like we've had people losing their loved ones, close, losing mothers, fathers, and because of COVID, they cannot travel home to actually be able to have that closure where they can actually bury their relatives. So that's a big impact, and the trauma that will come from that is it's long standing. It's very hard to deal with. So those are some of the challenges that people are facing.
And you have worked and probably still work in the child care, child protection, sorry, setting.
Mhm.
With that experience, how would you suggest people sort of look at trying to protect children from this sort of situation that may affect them mentally and impact them significantly? What would be? I mean, you may not necessarily be a psychologist, but I suppose you have a bit more experience in terms of how children. I mean, to look at the well-being of children based on everything that you know, and in this isolation that is really creating havoc. How can we minimize some of these effects on children?
Yeah, I guess, look, as I said, look, I think you find that in many of these sectors, in the child protection sector, I find that now probably it's gone virtual. People are interacting maybe through virtual. So I guess, look, that's pretty much sometimes what you can do. But no, look, I think there's also a minimum sometimes face-to-face interaction, because the child protection workforce is considered a crucial workforce. And so they are allowed to do like things like home visits, or maybe to carry out maybe assessments where they feel that there's areas that children are at risk. So I think that regular interaction is very important to make sure that our children that are in the child protection system are actually kept. Because what COVID has brought again is that there's now even there's just a spike, just talking to people in the community, maybe via the various online platforms, there's a spike even in domestic violence. And even this, so obviously with that also comes with, children are now exposed to this, to this kind of scenario. So it's a very big task even for different agencies and governments that they need to be looking at this very seriously, because now children, they are now placed at higher risk because of the limitations of probably of workers in the system to be able to actually engage with them meaningfully or as usual as they do. So I guess maybe probably we just have to rely on the online platforms that are available, because look, that's what's available, that's what we can do. So that's all we can do.
Yeah, and you mentioned the increase of family violence in many homes during this COVID crisis and then lockdown. Uh, Obviously, we can speculate that this is all related to that mental stress that is sort of imposed on people because of that isolation. Again, what would be some of your insights on people to sort of trying to minimize these things? Because obviously, as there's family violence between potentially the spouses, but that also affects their children. And who knows how long we're going to have to stay locked down, because there's no hope that is going to be finishing anytime soon. So it can even get worse. What will be some of your advice?
Now, I guess, like, as I said, look, previously, we need to check in on each other. As I said, look,
Mm.
some of the challenges that families are facing is loss of employment, loss of income. Some people they've lost their livelihood because of COVID. So you find that because of that, there's the money that used to come in, people doing certain things is no longer coming in. So there's a bit of strain financially in the home. So I think the important thing is for us to, as I said previously, to continually check on each other as individuals, as friends, as organization, whether in our churches, in our communities, whatever, in our neighbors, just the check-in, like using a phone call, using phone calls, or even the various online platforms, because that's what you can do. Because the more regular you have conversations with people, the more you're able to to understand what they're going through, and the more maybe you're able to offer some kind of solutions to them as well.
Yeah, that's all right. And community wise, obviously people can't meet anymore, or at least in person, but there are still community leaders and advocates. What has been happening in Sydney, for example? Has there been a lot of interactions between the government, for example, and community leaders to sort of check out on what's happening within the community level and look at ways to assist people in this, excuse me, in these difficult times?
Yes, I'm sure there's been some efforts to. I think one of the things probably look that I've seen happening is that I think the state government is trying to engage community leaders, because previously at the beginning of the pandemic it was just probably maybe sometimes maybe people they're not so used to maybe seeing police doing the patrolling, because to just check on people. And there's some people that have come from backgrounds where they were war situations, and every time they see anybody in uniform, then they'll really freak out. But I think the government, the state government, has gone a step to try and to mitigate this by actually involving community leaders, whether they're in churches, whether they are maybe probably various faith-based groups, and maybe just community level, to engage them so that they can actually be able to assist and support communities so that they understand the situation and also understand somehow how to mitigate in regards to the restrictions that are available. And also there's been a wide range of even translation of documentation as well, because initially there were very few translations of documents of publications that explain what is going on, that explains the restrictions as well. And so you find that sometimes you find people breaching, not necessarily because they want to breach, but because they have a lack of understanding of the rules and the regulations that are going on. But now I think increasingly there's a lot of literature that is being penned out through multicultural groups and through and translation that are now available in the widely across the community as well. So that is helping in terms of the engagement with the community leaders and the community as a whole.
And do you see that community leaders are proactive enough? Because obviously, the it this is like a two-way street where the government engages with the community to try and assist, or the community actually engages with the government to say, hey, look at what is happening here. How can you assist? Do you think there's enough proactive steps from the community to liaise with government and all other players or stakeholders to ensure that the community is receiving the best type of support that they can have in these difficult times?
I think more could be done. Look, I think we need more to be done in terms of communities, community leaders. Actually playing advocates for their communities. I think there could be more that could be done to actually advocate for the community. But I think, look, it's a work in progress, I guess. So I guess it's a work in progress. I know a few communities have been really been active and vocal in trying to advocate for their constituencies. So I think I guess it's a work in progress, and also it's about both parties, both sides, trying to to open up platforms where these discussions can actually be able to be heard, and then there's interaction both ways, so that there's some understanding on all the challenges and what can be done to make this work.
Okay, and you may not necessarily know or have all the information, but from what you know from your own circle of influence or your network, have there been many Africans in New South Wales who've been affected by COVID? I mean, who have lost who have died or lost their close relative? Do you know anything of this?
No, I don't have the figures at hand. But look, what I know is that many Africans that are here in Australia have lost a lot of their relatives back home. That I know, because in our community groups there are always messages that are being put for people that have lost relatives, that have lost parents, that have lost brothers, sisters back home, like overseas. There's quite a lot of that going around. So, but in terms of specific numbers of people that have lost their lives or that are impacted in New South Wales, look, I don't have this. I'm not privy to those that information, but I know like a lot of people are being affected, because most of the areas where there's high levels of numbers of COVID infections is actually where the areas that most African communities stay. Like in the Western Sydney area, that's where most Africans stay. So I would assume that most of them are actually impacted by this pandemic.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because there's a particular area of Sydney, Western Sydney, that is apparently more affected than other areas of Sydney, and the Western Sydney area has many migrant populations in general, and we're assuming there's also many more Africans than maybe other areas of Sydney. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the African population is quite a lot, so it's quite a huge number. But as I said, most of them are actually situated in Western Sydney area. So that's so that's where you find that like now that's where most of the numbers are rocketing every day.
Mm. And there is also a level of I'm not sure if I will put that as doubt or hesitancy to do the best that can be done for African individuals, especially when you talk about vaccine or even just protecting themselves from this disease. Now, this is obviously a different issue from the isolation that we are talking about. But when people are isolated, obviously there's a level of fear, there's a level of stress that comes with that can impact some level of decision making. Do you think the high level of vaccine hesitancy, as reported anecdotally, could also be linked to the fact that people are going through so much tough time and being isolated and don't have enough support, and therefore they may not necessarily take the best decisions that will work for them?
Well, I think initially in the initial stage that was the case, but I think now pretty much everybody now understands the situations. They've seen what is happening. But I think probably what I think probably I would sort of put the high levels of not uptake of vaccines maybe due to the fact that look, I think the vaccination process needs to go to the communities, to where they are, because I think sometimes it can be probably maybe accessibility, and so that could maybe hinder them, and also sometimes lack of information. Not many of the people maybe have access to the media as most people do. So sometimes accessibility and information might actually be hindered. So But I think there's been a slow progress in the distribution of the vaccines. Like now we find that vaccines are now distributed through GPs, through pharmacies. So that's a very good kind of effort in trying to get to the people, down to the people. So I guess now I think, look, from what I'm seeing, I think people are now increasingly and now going to do the uptake of vaccines in the community.
Yeah. And actually, before we go there, let me just remind those watching, you're watching African Knowledge on Africa Media Australia. And my guest tonight is Oliver Maboreke, who is in Sydney and talking to us about the situation in Sydney where the lockdown obviously is continuing. And we're talking about isolation and the impact of the isolation that is a result of the lockdown on people's mental health and also other aspects of life. So if you have questions or comments, please do not hesitate to make a comment and ask questions so we can address that. We know that isolation is linked to many issues, especially in terms of mental health. When people are isolated, they are prone to go through a lot of a high amount of stress, and that obviously is not good for health. So, Oliver, do you think that as Africans, we actually have a little bit of we sort of tough mentally? We may go through a lot of hard things, but we tend to not only go through it with least amount of issues, but even when we suffer, we are pretty resilient. Is that something that also you think is happening in New South Wales?
Yeah, look, I mean, Africans have always been a resilient people. Look, many of us that have come here have gone through a lot, and some have come from communities where there's war, there's strife and stuff like that, and we've survived. But look, this is a whole new different challenge altogether. And I think one of the things that made African resilience was the communal kind of thing, whereby the group element made people resilient because there's always support from the people around you, and there's always somebody that you can knock at the door and get support. There's always a support, an uncle, an aunt, and everywhere. But
Yeah.
I think this COVID situation is actually working to break down that resilience, because in isolation, when you isolate somebody, that means you are basically breaking down their mental faculties, and most people will not be able to function. It's almost like staying in solitude, maybe in prison. So I think, look, as much as we are as African people, we are resilient, but I think that resilience has been really tested in these times of COVID. What most people are now calling the new normal is really being tested very, 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 very stretched to the distance, I suppose.
Yeah, the new normal is that you may be locked in your house for a long, long, long time. So get ready. Hopefully, hopefully it doesn't take very long. But there's also kind of a positive side to the whole isolation thing. I guess you also have to train ourselves to see in the positive side of whatever may be as an issue, because in every crisis there's an opportunity. Uh, we, when you are locked down, when you are, prevented from moving around, you have to stay in your house. Then you have plenty of time to do things that perhaps you may not have done when you were free to go everywhere you liked. And I remember myself last year when the whole COVID was starting and we had to be locked down here in Melbourne. I had a book that I was writing, and it gave me quite a lot of time. I mean, I was almost at the end of my writing, but that the lockdown gave me a lot more opportunity to focus and do that. And I also met another young African person in Adelaide who also had the same experience. He said he used the lockdown to write a book, which is a very nice story about his journey from South Sudan to Kenya to Australia. So we should be creative and find out what we can do. We can use the time to, do stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess, like, I think it's about being adaptable. Like, for me, for example, look, I'm actually in my homemade studio at home. I'm a musician. I think I don't know how many songs I've written. I think I don't, I've been sort of using that time to, to do the things that I like, and I think this is the first time I've really spent time probably at home with my family. Like so it's a time that probably, I think, as I said, we need to kind of reinvent ourselves and try to find ways of trying to deal with the current situation, because as it looks, it's not going anytime soon. So, like, for example, as well, I'm actually even writing a book as well. It's been a long time coming. I've been doing this for a long time, but sometimes it has given me new ideas. And I think sometimes some people even talking about that, COVID is actually an opportunity for business. People are now getting into new businesses, PPI and,
Yeah.
sanitizing business. So many people are actually getting into business because of that. And also many people are getting into the online business, like, online business, online, people are getting to do online stuff. So that's probably, they always say that in the middle of adversity, there are always opportunities. So I think probably it's about us maybe looking hard and low to find out, maybe probably amidst this, what can we do to to bring a light in this kind of darkness that we're in.
Yeah. So we ought to be creative and trying to find things that we can do even when we are in lockdown. There must be something that we can use, we can spend our time doing, and until we go back to normal, whenever that is, or whether we're going to have the old normal back or it's a new normal, or who knows. We'll see what happens. Well, we are getting close to the end of the this show. Oliver, tell us what you would recommend with all your experience that you have. I mean, you've already mentioned a few things that people should be able to adapt to this situation, and obviously we understand that this can also take very long before we go back to what we used to understand as normal. What would be some of your recommendations as we get close to the end of the show?
Now, just look, I would just round up by saying that, we just need to stick together as a community. As I said, look, if you can't see each other face to face, this is now the opportunity to now look at maybe trying to use different platforms for us to interact, because that is the only way that we're going to keep in touch. And and I said, look, I think, because we need to be always checking out for each other's well-being. Well, that's very important this time, that our well-being, mental well-being, is very important. And also we also need to be checking on on our families as well. Sometimes it's a time to really reflect on our families, and and do the things, probably do the things that maybe we've never done before as a family, because of the time, because of that. Because, like, for me, I've been working from home for, I don't know, probably going on to the third month now. So
Mm.
home and office are here with me. So that's just so it's just about adapting in that kind of situation, and now, and just being able to reach out and communicate in the various medias that you've got to the people that you care about, or your networks.
Okay. Oliver Maboreke, thank you very much for your time to African Knowledge tonight. We appreciate you coming onto the show and sharing your experience, and telling us a little bit more about what is happening in Sydney. We hope that despite this number increasing, that sometime soon things will start getting better. Restrictions will be released, but we will keep in touch with you to get more information about the African Australian community in Sydney. Thank you again for your time tonight.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. And for all of you watching, thanks again for your time to watch African Knowledge. As usual, we will encourage you to share the video, to like our Facebook page, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click the notification buttons both on YouTube and on Facebook, so you are notified when we go live or when we publish other videos and other publications on our platforms. We also encourage you, if you have something to share in any area of your expertise, or you may not even be an expert in anything, except perhaps you have a good story that may inspire other people. We do have room for you. You may also want to share something about your culture, your language, whatever that can add value to the community. We encourage you to contact us. This platform has been put together to enable all African Australians and their friends and supporters to share knowledge, insight, and wisdom, so that we can be empowered through education, through knowledge, through information. Until next time, stay safe and stay blessed. Thank you very much. Bye bye.